Well, Patrick Mahenry, thank you for coming to our crowdfunding event here today. It's a pleasure having you and helping us out, and also for us to help everybody else out worldwide to let them know what's going on in the crowdfunding space. And we have David Weild with us as well. Pleasure having you. Maybe you could tell us a little more about your bill and some of the things you're going to be covering today.
Well, the idea is, obviously the marketplace is there from the conferences you've held around the country. There is support in the community and a willingness to mesh microfinance with crowdsourcing and using technology as it stands today to actually get capital formation going for small businesses. My legislation is very simple. It removes a SEC and a regulatory and barrier in law that we have for equity side raising from small sources from a large crowd of folks. And so what we want to do is enable the folks that attend your conference to actually take this idea and put it into action in a new way.
So what do you think we need to do to get this through the Senate?
Well, if you look at the action and activity of the online community with SOPA and PIPA as a very real example of online action and motivation and constituents calling and writing and emailing, we need to make sure that the Congress understands. We've passed the legislation out of the House. It is in the Senate. We need to make sure that the Congress understands that there is a desire among a cross-section of Americans for us to pass this legislation and enact it into law.
And Congressman, for the benefit of the people that are watching, what are SOPA and PIPA?
Well, you have you have two pieces of legislation that would, in essence, root out online piracy, but in a way that is very onerous for folks that have websites or have even internet service providers. And because of that construct and how the legislation acts, it is very burdensome to a wide array of tech communities, and that's why folks got activated. That's why Wikipedia went black.
A couple days ago. So what could people watching right now through the Soho Loft or through your website do to support this?
Well, they can email me. They can call my office and we'll give them all the information and background on our legislation. Then they can call their senators. The President has already issued a statement of administrative policy in support of our legislation. There's a wider view in Washington that this can pass. We just have to get the Senate to act.
Right. And the concern that's been expressed is one of potential for fraud. And what do you think? How do you think that that's going to be addressed, if you will, in the crowdsourcing?
Well, I mean, if that were the case, then if fraud were a widespread occurrence, eBay couldn't exist.
Right.
I think the construct of this legislation is such that you would have portals that would be the conduits for this, and then there would be a mechanism for individuals to make judgments about the companies that they invest in.
Right.
And it puts hands really it puts the power in the hands of the people, and that is what is so wonderful about crowdsourcing. You may be able to fool one person, but you can't fool 1 million people.
You can't fool the crowd.
That's right.
So the good ones are going to get snapped up in all likelihood just because of the chatter that will go on with the crowd, and the bad ones will probably just get turned over and left behind.
That's right. And so, but I think you would have, in essence, an eBay-style portal of sorts, and a wide variety of them, and people can make judgments for themselves on the companies they invest in. I mean, really the idea that with proper information, people can make wise investment decisions for themselves. What we now have is what we've accepted for securities laws in this country for the last 80 years is that some people simply shouldn't be allowed to invest. We now have a threshold of $1 million that we've accepted for almost the last 50 years as a threshold on whether or not you're an accredited investor. So now it's simply a net worth judgment on whether or not you're deeply knowledgeable on investments. I think that's a false premise. I think you have wise folks that have lower net worth, and you have folks with very high net worth that maybe shouldn't be investing in equities.
I mean, it's absolutely critical when you're dealing with small amounts of capital being raised, because the bill has basically two cutoffs, $1 million and then $2 million, if I read it correctly.
Yes.
That you keep the costs of accessing the capital markets low, because a small transaction can't sustain a large cost burden. Is that correct?
That's right. And now what we have under existing securities laws is for low equity raising. For under $5 million, if you invest in, if you have one investor from a state, potentially you have to register and pre-file with the securities administrator in that state.
Right.
So it is too burdensome to raise small dollar amounts across the 50 states under our current regulatory regime. And because of our current regulatory regime, you in essence price out small dollar equity raising, $1 million, $2 million. You price that out of the marketplace. Before we even think about the person who wants to open a second branch of their coffee shop and wants to raise $100,000 from the people who come in every day and order a latte.
I mean, I think it's important to know that, 99% of the businesses starting are not necessarily tech companies. There's the bakeries, there's the car wash, it's the local businesses you have in your neighborhood. And I think one of the safety nets is that you actually have people within the neighborhood, in the region that's close to you, that know who you are and what you're doing.
That's right. That's
I
right.
think that's important.
And you can build credibility. You can build performance standards. If you have that coffee shop and you want to open a second branch, then you can actually show a return for your investors, and then you can go back to them to raise equity for an additional branch or more. And I think people are more knowledgeable than regulators in Washington or even politicians in Washington think that they are. And so they should be able to be freed up in order to do this.
Well, Congressman McHenry, thank you for coming to the Soho Loft and the events where we try to educate everybody on crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. Pleasure having you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Good having you.
Thank you.
Terrific. Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.